I reached for the bread on the counter, my hand trembling slightly, when David slammed it back into the cabinet with such force the door rattled. "That's enough for you," he barked, his eyes cold, his jaw tight. His fingers, rough and impatient, clamped around my wrist, squeezing so hard that I gasped. Later I would discover the bruise, purple and ugly, blooming across the fragile skin of my arm. At that moment, though, all I felt was hunger and shame. My son, my only son, had just denied me food like I was some stray animal. And for what? Because I had dared to ask the simplest question, "What about my money, David? Where is it?" He had turned his face away, his lips curling in disgust as if my voice was a nuisance. "Your money," he scoffed, and in that sneer lay the greedy motive I had been too blind to see. 4 months now, my pension checks and the savings my late husband and I had set aside had been flowing through his hands, not mine. He said it was easier this way, that bills got paid quicker, that it was for my peace of mind. And I, foolishly trusting, desperate to believe he wanted to take care of me, had let him. But now the truth was written all over his face. It wasn't about peace of mind. It was about control. My son had turned my money into his leash, tightening it every time I dared to question him. What struck me hardest wasn't the food withheld or the bruise blossoming on my wrist. It was the realization that he didn't see me as his mother anymore. To him, I was a burden, a bank account, a body to be managed until it expired. His wife, Rebecca, encouraged this thinking with every sharp word she whispered when she thought I couldn't hear. "She eats too much," she'd say, "or she's draining us." She never considered that everything they had, their mortgage, their car, even the roof over their children's heads, had been partly paid with my savings. But that night, when I sat alone in my tiny room, the door locked from the outside as though I were a prisoner, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Not just anger. Not just heartbreak. But a clarity sharp as glass. They thought they could starve me into silence. They thought a bruise would scare me back into obedience. But instead, they had awakened something dangerous inside me, resolve. I remembered my husband's words before he passed. "Nora," he had said, his hand warm in mine, "don't ever let anyone take your dignity. Not me, not David, not anyone. Promise me." I had promised him through tears. And for years, I believed I had kept that promise by enduring. By giving. By sacrificing. But sitting there with hunger gnawing at my belly and pain throbbing in my arm, I realized endurance was not dignity. Dignity was saying enough. I walked to the mirror, old and spotted, hanging above the dresser David had shoved into the room. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Her hair, once neat and carefully pinned, now hung gray and loose. Her cheeks were hollow. Her eyes, though, still had fire. Wrinkled hands clenched the edge of the dresser, and in that moment, I whispered to my reflection, "They don't know who they're dealing with." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat upright on the edge of the bed, listening to the house breathe, the creak of pipes, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the soft snores of my grandchildren down the hall. My stomach growled, but I ignored it. Hunger sharpened my mind. I thought of every check I had signed, every dollar I had entrusted to David. I thought of the house I had sold when he insisted I was too old to maintain it, the proceeds of which had disappeared into accounts he controlled. I thought of Rebecca's satisfied smirk when she watched me shuffle past her in silence. And then, around midnight, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. My heart leapt. I had hidden it under my pillow for weeks, afraid David would take it from me. My fingers fumbled as I unlocked the screen. A message glowed in the darkness. It was from an unknown number. The words were simple, chilling, impossible to ignore. "Don't let them take everything. Tomorrow, you'll see the truth. Be ready." I stared at the screen, my pulse racing. Who had sent it? A friend? A neighbor? Someone who knew what was happening behind these walls? My mind raced with possibilities. The warning was cryptic, but one thing was certain, it confirmed my fear. This wasn't just about control. David and Rebecca weren't just withholding food or money. They were planning something bigger. Something final. I clutched the phone, trembling. For the first time in years, fear and courage battled inside me. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew this, I would not be silent anymore. I would not let them bury me alive in this house. If there was a truth waiting to be revealed, I would face it head on. And when I did, David and Rebecca would learn what it meant to underestimate a mother. The footsteps outside my locked door made the floorboards groan. David's shadow lingered in the crack beneath the door, then faded away. My heart pounded. I tightened my grip on the phone and whispered into the dark, "This isn't over." The morning after David had grabbed my arm so roughly that a bruise the size of his thumb had blossomed on my wrist, I woke up in the guest room they called my space. It wasn't mine at all. It used to be a storage room, bare walls, thin curtains that didn't keep out the sun, and a narrow bed that made my bones ache. I sat up slowly, clutching the wrist he had hurt, feeling the ache settle deeper into my skin. I had raised that boy with gentleness, with patience, and yet his hands had turned against me. It was a thought too painful to linger on, but one I couldn't escape. The door creaked open without a knock. David walked in, carrying a plate. He didn't look at me, he just set it down on the dresser and turned to leave. On the plate sat a single piece of dry toast, slightly burnt, and a glass of water half filled. "That's your breakfast," he muttered over his shoulder. His voice carried no warmth, no trace of the boy I had once sung to sleep. He didn't even bother to check if I was hungry, or if I needed anything else. I stared at the toast. That was all I had been given the night before too, a bowl of watery soup so thin it looked like dirty dishwater. My stomach growled, but my heart hurt worse. They weren't just feeding me scraps, they were starving me into silence. I forced myself to speak, though my voice cracked. "David," I said softly. He stopped at the door. "What?" His tone was sharp, impatient, like I was a burden he couldn't wait to be rid of. "I want to see my bank statements," I said, steadying my voice even though my chest felt tight. For a brief moment, I saw something flicker across his face, something he tried to hide, but I caught it. Fear. His eyes darted, then hardened into anger. He stepped back into the room, towering over me. "You don't need to see anything," he snapped. "I handle it all. That's what you wanted, remember? You said you were tired of dealing with bills." I shook my head slowly. I said I needed help, not to be cut out. "I want to see my own money." His jaw clenched. "Mom," he said in that tone people use when they're pretending to be patient, "you're not strong enough to deal with all that paperwork. Just let it go." I knew then, without a shadow of doubt, that he had taken more than my trust. He had taken control of everything. And if I didn't act soon, I would lose it all forever. Just then, Rebecca appeared in the doorway, holding her coffee cup. Her hair was neatly pinned, her blouse perfectly pressed. She always looked put together, while I was left in old nightgowns because they had locked away most of my clothes in boxes. She gave me a smile that wasn't really a smile at all. "Don't upset yourself, Nora," she said sweetly. "Money stresses you out. Leave it to us. That's why David takes care of things." I clenched my hands in my lap, biting down the words that wanted to spill out. Rebecca stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was letting me in on a secret. "Besides," she added, "we need it for the kids' future. College isn't cheap, you know. Surely you wouldn't take away from your grandchildren." Her words struck me like a slap. How dare she? I had sacrificed my whole life for family, for David, for the grandchildren I adored. Every penny my late husband and I had saved, every holiday we had gone without so David could have more, it had all been for family. And now, she used that same word like a weapon, twisting my love into their excuse for greed. I wanted to argue, but I stayed quiet. I couldn't let them see how much it cut me. Not yet. Later that day, I went to the living room, hoping to use the phone. I picked it up, but there was no dial tone. Confused, I tried again. Nothing. My heart sank. David had disconnected the house line. I rushed back to my room and opened the drawer where I had hidden my cell phone, the one my husband had given me before he passed. It wasn't there. Panic rose in my chest. I searched everywhere, under the bed, in the closet, in my dresser, but it was gone. Hours later, when I went into the garage, I found it in a dusty box, tossed aside like trash. The battery was missing. They had silenced me completely. No phone. No way to call my friends. No way to reach the bank. For the first time in years, I felt truly trapped. That night, as I lay in the dark, I thought about everything I had done for David. I remembered the nights I stayed up sewing clothes when we couldn't afford new ones. The times I skipped meals so he could eat more. The jobs I took on after his father died, cleaning houses until my back ached, just to keep the roof over our heads. And this This was how he repaid me? My chest tightened with both grief and rage. The next evening, I heard them talking through the thin walls. Rebecca's voice was sharp, filled with irritation. She's asking too many questions, David. What if she talks to someone? David laughed softly. Who would believe her? She's old, confused half the time. Nobody's going to take her seriously. Besides, she can't go anywhere. We've taken care of that. Rebecca lowered her voice, but I still caught it. We can't let her ruin this. We need every cent for the down payment. If she resists, we'll just keep her weak. She won't fight back. Keep me weak. The words echoed in my head like a threat. They thought my age was their shield. They thought my silence was permanent. But they were wrong. That night, as I lay awake, a new thought crept in. If they wanted to keep me hidden, then I had to make sure someone saw me, someone saw what they were doing. I couldn't just sit here and fade away. I wasn't done yet. I looked at my bruised wrist in the moonlight and whispered to myself, they think they've won. But they don't know me. The next morning, Rebecca came in with my breakfast, a half cup of oatmeal with no sugar. She set it down like she was feeding a dog. Then she said, "Oh, and don't forget, the lawyer's coming by later. Just a quick signature for some paperwork." Her eyes glittered when she said it. I knew then what they were doing. They weren't just starving me. They weren't just silencing me. They were planning to take everything, my house, my savings, my independence. And that was the moment I made my choice. I would let them think I was weak. I would let them think they had me trapped. But quietly, carefully, I would begin my fight. Because they had underestimated me, and that would be their greatest mistake. Before I could put any plan into motion, the lawyer came earlier than expected, and what he slid across the table nearly stopped my heart. "I want to look at it," I said firmly, surprising even myself with the steadiness in my voice. Rebecca's eyes flicked toward David, a silent message passing between them. He stepped closer, his shadow falling across me, his jaw tightening the way it used to when he didn't get his way as a child. But this was no child anymore. This was a man who looked at me not with love, but with irritation, as if I were a fly buzzing around his kitchen. "Mom," he said slowly, as though speaking to someone who had lost their senses, "you're not handling things anymore. Rebecca and I are. You'll just confuse yourself with all this paperwork." My lips trembled, but I forced the words out. Confuse myself? I worked 2 jobs for years. I kept every receipt, every bill, every note from the bank. I balanced my checkbook down to the penny. I'm not confused. Something dark flickered across his eyes, but he turned away muttering, "We'll talk later." Rebecca slipped the envelope into a drawer before I could move closer. I heard the soft click of the lock, and my heart sank like a stone. From then on, I wasn't even allowed near the mail. Each day, I'd see the stack arrive, neat and white in the mailbox outside. Rebecca would snatch it up before I could shuffle to the door, and by the time I made it to the kitchen, the envelopes were gone. I began to notice her little smiles, the way her fingers lingered on certain letters, how she whispered with David afterward. Something was happening. Something with my money, my name, my life. Weeks passed, and I shrank further into the shadows of my own home. The once bright walls felt oppressive, the floral curtains heavy. I wasn't allowed to cook anymore. Rebecca said I made too much of a mess. I wasn't allowed to touch the laundry. She claimed I didn't do it properly. Even the garden I had tended for 30 years, roses that bloomed faithfully every spring, had been locked behind a new gate. "You could fall," David said when I asked about it. "Better you stay inside where it's safe." Safe. That word burned in my ears. Safe meant silence. Safe meant control. Safe meant caged. But my mind, though weary, stayed sharp. I started keeping small notes on scraps of paper I managed to tuck into my sweater pockets, the dates, the times, little observations. I wrote when they yelled, when they locked the drawer, when the mail came, when my food was cut back. It gave me something to hold on to, some proof that I wasn't imagining all of this. One cold afternoon, as the pale winter sun filtered weakly through the blinds, the house phone rang. Rebecca answered, her voice honey-sweet. "Yes, this is she. Oh yes, we received the forms. Of course, we'll have them signed." My heart nearly stopped. Forms? Signed? I leaned closer to the crack in the door, straining to hear. Yes, yes, she continued. It's all under control. She won't be a problem. The blood drained from my face. I stumbled back to my chair, clutching the armrest until my knuckles whitened. They were signing something, and it had to be about me. That night, I confronted David when Rebecca was upstairs. What forms? I asked, my voice trembling. He froze. For a moment, I saw the boy I once knew, his face soft with guilt. But then his jaw hardened again. Don't worry about it, Mom. It's just financial adjustments. To make things easier. Easier for who? I snapped, my strength surprising both of us. You can't just take what's mine. His eyes flashed, and before I knew it, his hand slammed against the table, rattling the salt shaker. Enough. You don't understand how hard this is for us. We're the ones taking care of you. We deserve something in return. The words sliced me open. We deserve something. As if my decades of sacrifice weren't enough. As if raising him, loving him, giving him everything I had, wasn't already everything I could give. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, my thin blanket pulled to my chin, listening to their muffled voices upstairs. My stomach growled with hunger, but the ache in my chest was worse. I thought of the money I had saved so carefully, not for myself, but for David, for my grandchildren, for the future. And now it was slipping away, piece by piece, into Rebecca's manicured hands. The bruise on my arm throbbed with every heartbeat. My body was failing me, but my mind clung desperately to clarity. I couldn't let them take everything. Days later, an unexpected visitor gave me the first flicker of hope. It was Mrs. Carter, my neighbor from 2 houses down. A widow in her late 60s with a kind smile, she stopped by with a small tin of cookies. Rebecca wasn't home, and David was out running errands, so for the first time in weeks, I wasn't under their watchful eyes. Oh dear, Mrs. Carter whispered when she saw me. You've lost so much weight. And your arm, what happened? I instinctively pulled down my sleeve, but her eyes were sharp. Tears welled in mine as I shook my head. Just a fall, I whispered, though my voice cracked with the lie. She looked unconvinced. She sat with me at the table, her hand warm over mine. If you ever need help, you come to me, all right? Anything at all. The kindness in her eyes nearly broke me. I wanted to pour it all out, to tell her everything, the hunger, the stolen money, the bruises. But the sound of a car pulling into the driveway froze me in place. David's truck. Go, I whispered urgently. Please go. She squeezed my hand once more before slipping out the back door, her eyes filled with worry. That night, I thought of Mrs. Carter's words over and over. If you ever need help, you come to me. It was the first time in months that I felt the tiniest spark of possibility. I wasn't completely alone. But sparks are fragile things. And Rebecca, with her sharp eyes and sharper tongue, was quick to snuff them out. The very next morning, she cornered me in the hallway. You had a visitor yesterday, didn't you? Her smile was thin, dangerous. Remember, no one wants to hear a crazy old woman's rambling. You'll just embarrass yourself. Her words sliced deeper than the bruise ever had. But inside I felt something stir, not just pain, not just fear, but something harder. Anger. For the first time in months, I didn't lower my gaze. I looked her straight in the eye and said softly, we'll see. The bruise on my arm had turned a sickly yellow by the time I finally decided enough was enough. Every time I glanced at it, I was reminded of how far things had fallen, how a son I once cradled and rocked to sleep could grip me so hard I felt less like his mother and more like a prisoner. I stared at that bruise one evening while sitting on the edge of my bed, the thin blanket pulled up to my lap, and thought, this is the line. This is where I stop letting him take everything from me. But knowing that in my heart and putting it into action were two very different things. I still had fear coiled tightly in my chest, fear that if I stood up to Daniel, he'd throw me into one of those homes permanently, lock me away somewhere I had no say, no voice, no dignity left. And yet, the more I thought of it, the more I realized, wasn't I already living in a prison of sorts? I started watching them closely, Daniel and his wife Melissa. The way they exchanged looks when they thought I wasn't paying attention. The way my purse suddenly felt lighter after Melissa had helped tidy my things. The way Daniel's voice grew louder and sharper every time I asked about the small pension I still received, money that had been meant for me to survive, not to pad their vacations or gadgets. One morning, While Melissa was out at her yoga class and Daniel had gone to work, I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of weak coffee in front of me. The old clock ticked loudly on the wall. I opened the bottom drawer of the hutch where I'd hidden a few things. Inside, wrapped in an old dish towel, was the small black notebook I'd started keeping. My handwriting was shaky, but every line mattered: dates, times, what was taken, how I was treated, what was said. It wasn't much, but it was something solid, a record, proof that I wasn't imagining things, that I hadn't lost my mind. That notebook became my companion. Each time Daniel shouted, I wrote it down. Each time Melissa forgot to give me dinner, I made a note. Each time my arm or my wrist showed a new mark, I described it in detail. That notebook felt like the first weapon I had in this quiet war. Still, it wasn't enough. I knew I'd need more than scribbled words in shaky pen ink. That's when I thought of Carol, my neighbor from years ago. Carol and I had shared coffee nearly every morning when we both lived back in the old neighborhood, before I sold my house and moved in with Daniel. She was practical, sharp as a tack, and not one to mince words. If there was anyone I could trust, it was her. So one afternoon, when Melissa had gone out again and Daniel was still at work, I called Carol from the landline. My voice trembled as I held the receiver to my ear. Carol, I whispered, it's me. It's Margaret. I need your help. There was a pause, then her familiar voice softened. Margaret? My goodness, it's been so long. What's wrong? The dam inside me broke. I told her everything, my words stumbling out faster than I'd planned, the food being withheld, the bruises, the money missing, the fear that grew heavier every day. Carol didn't interrupt, not once. When I finally stopped, my throat dry and aching, she said firmly, You're coming over here tomorrow. We'll talk properly. And don't you dare say no. The next day, I told Melissa I wasn't feeling well and needed to lie down. As soon as she left, I slipped out the back door with my small handbag clutched to me. My legs shook as I walked down the block and climbed into the cab I had called. My heart hammered in my chest the whole ride to Carol's house. When she opened her door and pulled me into a hug, I felt years of pent-up grief crash into me. She looked at me, really looked, and her face hardened when she saw the bruise on my arm. Those monsters, she muttered. We're not letting them get away with this. Carol sat me at her kitchen table, poured me tea, and made me eat half a sandwich, insisting I needed strength. Then she pulled out her phone and said, We're calling a lawyer. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today. I panicked. My stomach twisted. Carol, I don't know. It's so much. What if Daniel finds out? She put her hand over mine, steady and warm. Margaret, listen to me. He's already taken too much from you. Your money, your peace, your health. You have every right to take it back. If you don't do this now, when will you? So we called. The lawyer she reached, a woman named Rebecca, agreed to see me that very afternoon. Carol drove me herself, refusing to let me go alone. Rebecca's office smelled faintly of leather and coffee. She was young compared to me, but her eyes were steady, her voice calm and precise. She listened carefully, asking questions gently but firmly. When I showed her my notebook, her eyebrows raised. This is good, she said. Very good. Documentation is powerful. She explained that I still had legal rights over my finances, my house, and even over where I chose to live. She said that if I wanted, she could file motions to protect me from being placed into care against my will, and even investigate the financial abuse. For the first time in a long while, I felt something bloom in my chest that had nearly died out, hope. Still, when I returned to Daniel's house that evening, I felt like I was carrying a dangerous secret in my handbag. Melissa noticed immediately. You're glowing, she sneered. What did you do today, old lady? Find some friends to gossip with. I just smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't give anything away. Inside though, I thought, yes, I found someone. And soon, you'll regret underestimating me. From that day forward, everything changed inside me. Each insult, each bruise, each greedy grab of my pension check no longer crushed me. Instead, they fueled me. Because now, I wasn't just suffering, I was preparing. They didn't know it yet, but I wasn't the helpless old woman they thought. I was gathering strength, allies and proof. And when the time came, I would strike back with everything I had left. And the thought that carried me through the nights when my body ached and my stomach growled was this: Revenge, when it finally arrived, would be quiet, sharp, and undeniable. I could almost taste it. Carol didn't hesitate when she heard the break in my voice. She came over the very next morning, pulling into the driveway in her old blue Buick, her arms loaded with grocery bags as if she were simply visiting an old friend. That was Carol, smart enough to make sure nothing looked suspicious from the outside. When she stepped into the kitchen, I nearly collapsed with relief. She looked exactly the same, her hair whiter maybe, but her eyes just as sharp. She took one look at me and set those grocery bags on the table with a thud. "My God, Margaret," she whispered, touching my arm gently. Her eyes landed on the fading bruise. "How long has this been going on?" I swallowed hard, shame burning in my chest. Too long. I didn't want to believe it at first, but Daniel isn't the boy I raised. And Melissa, I stopped myself before I said too much. Carol leaned closer. "You don't need to say it all right now. But you're getting out of here. Do you understand me?" Those words, so firm, so certain, sent shivers down my spine. Nobody had spoken to me like that in months. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone on my side. Over the next week, Carol became my anchor. Whenever Melissa was gone and Daniel at work, she'd come by under the excuse of bringing food or checking on me. Together, we hatched a plan. I showed her my little black notebook, the pages filled with trembling handwriting. She nodded approvingly. "This is good, Margaret. But we're going to need more." More came in the form of Carol's old digital camera. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. She taught me how to hide it near the bookshelf in the living room, the lens just peeking out. The first time I pressed record, my hand shook so badly I thought I'd drop the thing. But I did it. I filmed the way Melissa shoved a plate toward me with nothing more than dry bread while she and Daniel sat down to a full dinner. I filmed Daniel's outbursts, his face red as he barked at me for complaining about money that isn't even yours anymore. The footage was raw, grainy, but powerful. Every insult, every sneer, every cruel laugh, it was all there. And each night when I was alone, I transferred the recordings to a small USB stick Carol had given me. That tiny piece of plastic felt heavier than gold. The turning point came one evening when Daniel stormed in after work. He'd clearly had a bad day, and as usual, I was his target. "Why are the bills stacked up again?" he demanded, slamming a folder onto the table. "Do you have any idea what kind of stress I'm under because of you? I should have put you in a home months ago." I sat quietly, my heart pounding, the camera hidden and rolling. Melissa smirked behind him, arms crossed, enjoying every second of my humiliation. I wanted to scream, to cry, to tell him how dare he speak to me that way after everything I'd sacrificed for him. But instead I sat still, my notebook open beside me, and let the camera capture it all. Later, I gave Carol the footage. She watched it with her lips pressed tight. When it ended, she looked me square in the eye. "Margaret, it's time. You're going to take your life back." The plan unfolded slowly, carefully. Carol contacted her lawyer friend, a man who'd handled elder abuse cases before. Together they arranged everything, my finances, my escape, even the sale of the little property I still had in my name that Daniel didn't know about. For the first time in years, I felt like I had power again. The final blow came sooner than I expected. One rainy Friday evening, Daniel cornered me in the hallway. He grabbed my wrist again, harder this time, and hissed, "You keep pushing me, and you'll end up in a nursing home where nobody cares if you eat or not. Do you understand?" I didn't flinch. I looked him right in the eyes, my voice steady. "Do you know what I understand, Daniel? I understand that you're about to lose everything." He blinked, stunned by the firmness in my tone. Melissa scoffed behind him, but I turned away and went to my room. Inside, under my blanket, the USB stick was already gone, safely in Carol's hands. Within days, the lawyer filed motions, freezing what accounts I still had a legal claim to. Daniel's access was cut off. He exploded when he found out, but by then, I was no longer under his roof. Carol had driven me away in the dead of night, my suitcase packed with only essentials, my notebook tucked inside. The court date came fast. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, as the footage played for the judge. Daniel's angry voice filled the courtroom. Melissa's mocking laughter echoed off the walls. My bruised arm, my empty plate, my trembling silence, it was all laid bare. I didn't look at Daniel. I didn't need to. I could feel his rage like heat on the back of my neck. But for the first time, it didn't scare me. When the gavel came down, it was like chains breaking. The judge ruled in my favor. Daniel and Melissa were cut off from my finances, permanently. I was granted full independence and protection under law. Walking out of that courthouse, the sun hit my face in a way I hadn't felt in years. Warm, freeing, almost like it was washing the shadows off me. Carol held my arm gently, not in control, not in force, but in support. I looked at her and whispered, "I never thought I'd feel free again." She smiled. "You earned it, Margaret. You fought back." That night, in the small apartment Carol helped me find, I sat with my notebook. The last page was blank. Slowly, I picked up my pen and wrote, "He tried to starve me, silence me, and control me. But I am still here. And I am free." I closed it and felt peace settle over me, deep and real. The kind of peace that comes not just from surviving, but from finally standing up, finally saying no. And as I drifted to sleep in my own bed, I knew one thing for certain: Daniel had thrown away the best part of his life the day he chose greed over love. Because a mother's heart may bend, but it does not break. And mine, at long last, was unshackled.